Pesach is a wonderful time of year. Pesach is much anticipated, possibly more than any other festival, with the possible exception of Rosh Hashanah. Pesach takes a lot of preparation and a lot of anticipation. On the other hand, the laws of Pesach are pretty much the same year to year. There can practical circumstances which are subject to change. A few years ago, we had the shadow of the epidemic that certainly forced new circumstances upon us and upon most of the world. But for the most part, the laws of preparing for Pesach and celebrating the Chag, again, technological or other advances from time to time, but they don't tend to change that much. What I'm trying to get at, though, is that this year is different. Why is this year different? Because, of course, as you are aware, Pesach begins on Sunday, Motzei Shabbat, which means that Erev Pesach, which is a very notable day on the calendar, is on Shabbos. And this gives rise to a whole series of fascinating and important considerations. And for that reason, it's my plan to devote most of our time tonight to a practical review and explanation of how we meet the requirements of Pesach preparation, mitzvot that are associated with Erev Pesach and prior to that as well, and of course with Shabbos also. The good news, if you don't cherish this kind of complication, is that it won't happen again until 2045. So there's going to be a 20-year hiatus. The last time was more recently than that, but in any case, there now will be an interval for years until we have this again. So I just want to say that I have prepared some notes which will be available through our website. And the notes are the basis of our discussion tonight. And if they're not up yet, they will be up tomorrow, Emir Hashem, on our website. And you can download the notes from there by way of review, which you're certainly welcome to make use of. For those who come to Kesher, they're printed out. They will be available at Kesher as well. So the first point I want to make is that although we'll see tonight, there are a number of complications, a number of ways in which the Pesach, the occurrence of Shabbos on Erev Pesach or Erev Pesach and Shabbos does bring complications, but actually it has some benefits as well. We may think of it as a cause of stress, but it can equally be seen as an opportunity, because usually Erev Pesach is a very busy day in its own right for a number of reasons. And even most well-planned and disciplined individual, let alone a woman who has household responsibilities and perhaps family responsibilities, it's very difficult for any person to actually relax on Erev Pesach and to have a chance to take a nap. This is a rarity. Maybe if you're a proper yekka, perhaps you can do it, but I never can. But when Shabbos is on Erev Pesach, then you have that opportunity. Now the clocks have already changed, so as we'll discuss, Shabbos ends quite late, which means that under normal favorable circumstances, let's say, there is an opportunity to kick back and actually to enjoy Shabbos and to enjoy Erev Pesach, which is something which you may not have the chance to do. I certainly don't, year by year. Friday, of course, therefore, takes on some of the roles and some of the activities that would not be done on Erev Pesach, such as burning chametz and others, we cannot do on Shabbos, and therefore we have to naturally do them on Friday. So, on the other hand, because we don't have the same time pressures on Friday, because it's the day before Erev Pesach, strictly speaking. So, although we do burn the chametz in the usual way, but you don't have the same time pressure in ways that we'll discuss shortly. So let's begin with Tanis Bechoros, the fast of the firstborn. Again, normally this is done on Erev Pesach. It's interesting, although a man knows if he's a firstborn, if he doesn't have elder siblings, and he's a firstborn. But the halakhah about the fast of the firstborn, according to some, extends not only to firstborn boys, but firstborn girls as well. The halakhah, which we don't really follow that very much. We don't know about firstborn girls who fast on. It is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, but it's not common practice. But what is halachically definitive is that a father who has a firstborn son, even if he himself is not a firstborn, he has to fast on behalf of his firstborn son until the lad becomes bar mitzvah. So when our firstborn came to the world, Sadia, who was born actually uh, on Rosh Chodesh Adar, about 6 weeks before Pesach. So although I'm not a Bechor, but I was required to fast or to attend a Siyum. We'll get to that shortly. I was required to fast until Sadia became Bar Mitzvah. After that, he's responsible for himself. Again, the interesting thing is that some hold that if a man is a firstborn and he has a son who is also firstborn, then since he's fasting for himself, so who's going to fast on behalf of his toddler? So some hold that the mother has to fast in that case. Again, I don't think that's common practice either, but it's interesting that this fast, although it is very much of a minor fast, as we'll see in a moment, but it does have implications that are unusual, and in a way it has a broader reach, a broader sort of, it encompasses more individuals than we might imagine at first blush. I probably know the common minhag nowadays is that a Bechor seeks out a Sudas mitzvah opportunity in order to exempt him from the fast. And although in some cases, when a person who is fasting goes to a Sudas mitzvah, a mitzvah repast, and therefore it sets aside the fast and he eats, he has to fast another day to make up for it in some other cases. But again, in the case of Tanis B'choros, the minhag is not like that. Even that is also mentioned that if that's what you do, you've got to fast on a day after Pesach to make up for it. But that is not the common practice, but rather a person who is a Bechor or is fasting on behalf of a Bechor attends a Sudas mitzvah such as a Siyum, and he eats something at the Siyum, and having broken his fast, at that point, he doesn't have to fast the rest of the day. Then this is common practice, and this is going to be what we'll do at Kesher as well. And but when is the fast observed? So strictly speaking, the fast is Erev Pesach. Of course, we don't fast on Shabbos. We could fast the previous day on Friday, but we don't favor fasting on Friday either, because then you enter Shabbos in a state of hunger. So therefore, we fast on Thursday. But in accordance with the common minhag, as I said, is that we actually don't fast at all, and we instead attend a Siyum, and we're going to have a siyum at Kesher, and I'm sure there are many other siyumim that will take place. A question that has been asked in recent years is, can a person attend a siyum remotely through Zoom or through some other medium? It's interesting. This question I first saw asked about 10 or 12 years ago, when cell phones had already become very commonplace, very popular, and someone wanted to know that question. He didn't ask me, he asked a distinguished rabbi, and the rabbi said, no, it doesn't work. You can't listen to a siyum on a cell phone when you're sitting at home. It's not called participating in the siyum. However, in the wake of the, again, upending of life in the shadow of the epidemic, many were makil, and I think that has now become the commonly accepted ruling for those who have difficulty in attending a siyum, that if you attend virtually through Zoom or something like that, after all, we're learning Torah tonight right now through Zoom, how many, probably hundreds of millions of hours of Torah now have been taught collectively in aggregate, in terms of the many listeners to various shiurim through this medium, and therefore it has now become regarded as an acceptable alternative if need be. Certainly, it is better to attend in person and to celebrate the siyum with the person who has completed the tractate or whatever subject it may be. Okay, what about
Sorry, Rabbi Simon, can I ask you if
yeah.
for whatever reason, like they're flying Friday morning and can't attend, and Zoom or whatever remote is
Okay,
difficult,
remember
then you just have to fast?
the fast is on Thursday on this occasion.
It's on
The fa-
Thursday, not
yeah,
on Friday.
that's
Okay.
right. The fast is pushed back, but your question could still apply. A person could fly on Thursday as well. Uh, so I kind of cut you off because I wanted just to clarify that the fast is on Thursday.
On
But
Thursday. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
but if a person is able to attend, so frequently you can use a cell phone or other methods, but sometimes you're literally on a flight and there's no broadband there in that kind of situation. So does a person in that situation have to fast? So strictly speaking, a person who is a Bechor has to fast. However, this year especially, there are grounds to be lenient. Some hold, even though we've been discussing it for the last 5 or 10 minutes, but some hold that when the is cannot be observed on Erev Pesach, there's no fast at all. Meaning that even on Thursday we say we don't have to fast because there's no, let's say, more significant Sudas mitzvah than Shabbos itself. So if you have a piece of cake or something at the Siyum and you say, okay, I don't have to fast the rest of the day. So all the more so, if you have the whole Shabbos on that day, it should cancel the fast altogether. So there are those who hold that this year there's no requirement to fast at all. I wouldn't go quite that far because there's not the accepted halacha, but there are other strategies that a person can employ. A person can give tzedakah in the value of the food that he eats in the course of the day. That is also an approach which is legitimate, certainly under the circumstances that we're discussing. But just to say that a person who is fasting, so when the fast ends and nightfall has arrived, he obligation for bedikas chametz, and a person should not eat before bedikas chametz. So what will this individual do? He's hungry. It's already 8:30 at night. He's been fasting all day. He doesn't want to wait another hour or longer till he finishes bedikas chametz. Moreover, if he's so hungry and eager to finish the job, he might not perform the bedikas chametz in the most meticulous way. So it's again commonly accepted that if a person is hungry and he's fasting, hungry, he can have a snack before nightfall, or rather after nightfall, before bedikas chametz. Even though generally a person should not eat, certainly not a formal meal, before the mitzvah of bedikas chametz, once the time for the chametz search has arrived. So let's talk about that. The right time to do it in London is promptly at nightfall, which I would reckon is about 8:30 p.m. So once it reaches the time of 8:30, a person should not delay further and not take up any other activity, learning Torah or something very worthwhile, should not be undertaken at that point. A person who is learning probably should even pause or interrupt his learning in order to do bedikas chametz, even though it's not Erev Pesach Thursday night. Erev Pesach would be Friday night. But we do say the bracha as usual, and afterwards the Kol Chamira declaration should also be said by all members of the family who may own chametz. So if a child is 6 or 8 or 10, he wouldn't have to, because his chametz, if he has any, belongs to the household. But a teenager, or certainly someone who is older, maybe living at home, or maybe is not living at home, but he or she is sort of with the household at the time of bedikas chametz, should make that declaration. Anyone who may own chametz should make that declaration. You can find it in your siddur or in your Haggadah. We'll return to that shortly, but for now, we'll just leave it at that. One should say after bedikas chametz in the usual way. An area that will not be used over Pesach can be closed up and sold. Now, this is very relevant because many of us do not actually totally expunge all of our chametz. We rely on the very widespread halachic device of mechiras chametz. We utilize the services of a rabbi to act as our agent, and I'm you in that capacity, if you like, to sell my chametz, and each person sells his or her chametz in that way. And by so doing, the mitzvah of sort of divesting oneself of any chametz has been achieved, even though we don't rely on that completely by itself either. We also search for chametz, and we destroy the chametz. But I'm saying if a person has chametz, maybe he has a box of Cheerios, or he has a bottle of whiskey, or perhaps a multiple of that, which he intends to sell over Pesach. So he puts that in a cabinet or maybe in a room, and he does bedikas chametz on the rest of the house. So again, normal practice is you don't search through your whiskey cabinet for chametz on Erev Pesach, or in this case Thursday night, because you know you have chametz there. You've got a bottle of whiskey or multiple bottles of whiskey, as the case may be. But because you've already contracted to sell it, although the sale has not yet taken place, but you've made an arrangement. So in accordance with general practice, one does not have to do bedikas chametz on that part or parts of the house, a cabinet or a room or a closet, where a person knows that he does have chametz, but that chametz is going to be subject to the sale, and he has already put in place the mechanism, to achieve that.
So what happens again if you go abroad and I can't remember, you do bdikat hametz still
Okay.
like
So
where
that's a
you
good
are?
question, a very practical question. So, yeah, so one is going abroad again. If one is traveling on Friday, for example, you can do bedikas chametz in the normal way on Thursday night. Um, what if you're traveling on Thursday, or what if you say, "Look, I'm going to be away from this house on Pesach, so do I still have to do bedikas chametz?" So strictly speaking, you don't really have to, because you have a strategy to ensure that you have no chametz in your possession on Pesach, namely you've made arrangements to sell the chametz. Nevertheless, it's proper to still do bedikas chametz so as not to neglect the mitzvah or sort of evade or obviate the mitzvah entirely. And what I always recommend is a person should designate one room of the house, maybe the hallway, the front hallway, or even a bedroom, part of the house in which to do bedikas chametz, and a person can still fulfill the mitzvah that the sages have ordained to search for chametz using a candle or using a flashlight or something like that. But you don't have to search the whole house in a scenario where you're not going to be in the house, nor will anyone else be in the house. So again, if you're going away for Pesach, in my recommendation is you should still do bedikas chametz in one part of the house and ensure there is no chametz in that part of the house, and the rest of the house you can designate as the place pieces that may have chametz, but you've made arrangements to sell it in accordance with normal practice.
And you do the
So,
usual bracha any even if
yes,
it's one area. Okay, thank you.
yes, yes. So the thing is, yes, you can do the bracha. You should do the bracha then. Um, Normally, if you're doing the bedikas chametz prior to the night before Pesach, one does not make a bracha. But this year, we're all doing bedikas chametz on Thursday night. So if you're home on Thursday night, you make a bracha even on that limited place, just like other people will make a bracha on 90% of the house and 10% of the house is designated for chametz. So a person who's going away will do the opposite. He'll do bedikas chametz on 10% of the house or one room of the house, and the rest of it will be designated for to contain the chametz which is going to be sold.
Thank you.
So you can make a bracha in the normal way. The biur chametz is the word biur means to like expunge or destroy, especially through fire. And although we're going to eat chametz on Shabbos, which we're going to discuss in some detail, nevertheless, the minhag is on Erev Shabbos, on Friday, to burn any chametz that we're not going to use and that we haven't removed and we're not going to sell, to burn it before the usual time. The usual time is 11:53 a.m. So even though strictly speaking, a person can eat chametz the whole day on Friday and the first part of Shabbos morning as well. But nevertheless, in order to maintain the usual rhythm year by year, so the person shouldn't say, well, I remember last year we were burning the chametz late in the afternoon, so we'll do the same this year. That would be a big mistake because the process of burning the chametz has to be accomplished by 11:53 on Erev Pesach, and therefore, in order to not confused with the future year, we still adhere. We still adhere to that timing on Friday to burn the chametz before 11:50. Now I keep saying burning the chametz, even though we've also said that you can remove it, you can even sell it, as we do. It still is proper to burn some chametz. We always try to keep a few pretzels or a few Cheerios or something. It's proper to burn the chametz as well, because of Buddha, who is of the opinion that biur chametz has to be done through burning. So you don't have to burn, boxes of cereal, but if you have a few Cheerios or crackers or biscuits or pretzels, it's proper to burn that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of burning chametz, as I said, even if it's only a small amount. It's best not to acquire any additional chametz after this time. So we'll talk soon about a plan for Shabbos. and a person is allowed to eat chametz certainly on Friday night for sure, but it's better not to acquire additional chametz because the sale of chametz is going to be contracted on your behalf on Friday. And if you buy chametz after the rabbi has already sold the chametz on your behalf, so whatever you buy subsequently, it's doubtful if it can be included in the sale. So whatever chametz you want to acquire, you should do so before midday or yeah, on Friday if possible. If you forget to put away chametz that you plan to sell, you can still put it away even on Shabbos until the Sof Zman Bi'ur, until that threshold of 11:53. Excuse me. Actually, yeah, I'm working with 11:34 on Shabbos for certain reasons. I don't want to go into the details of that. So, the point is that it's proper to put away, to localize whatever chametz you are going to sell. It should be locked away or designated in a cabinet or a closet already before this time. Okay, let's talk about the declaration of Kol Chamir. And normally we say that declaration at night, and then we say a very similar declaration, maybe it's even identical, I can't quite recall, the next day at the time when we burn the chametz. But this year, don't say that declaration now, because as I said, usually the time we burn the chametz, that's it, no more chametz. I don't have any chametz, I don't own any chametz. Whatever chametz I used to own has already been sold, so I am chametz free. That's the whole idea, and I make that declaration. That's in a usual year. But this year, because we are burning the chametz on Friday, and we're going to eat chametz later in the day, and that night and even next morning. So therefore, we don't say the declaration of called Chamir v'Chamia, where I disown any chametz which I have overlooked, etc. I don't do that until the next day on Shabbos, and we'll talk about that shortly. The usual restrictions of malacha that apply from midday on Erev Pesach, like haircuts and shaving, a person should do those things before midday on Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, I said, very special day. It's like a Yom Tov in its own right, in some respects. That's because in antiquity, in the afternoon of Erev Pesach, they would already slaughter the Paschal lamb, and to a great extent, Erev Pesach has some of the laws of Chol HaMoed. But this year, because Erev Pesach is Shabbos and Friday is the day before that, so therefore these restrictions do not apply. But remember to empty any bins that may contain chametz, to change the hoop. This is problematic to do on Shabbos, and therefore those activities should be accomplished. Those sort of last stage chametz, reduction campaign should be accomplished on Friday before the Zman Bi'ur, the time of the removal of the chametz, which is 11:53. Here's another point, another preparatory thought, that since one is not allowed to prepare anything on Shabbos for the Seder, so whatever is possible to prepare for the Seder night itself on Friday, it's proper to do that. So if you have the capacity to set the table for the Seder on Friday, because you've got somewhere else to eat on Shabbos, somewhere else within the household, we'll talk about where in a moment, then you should do so. Any other preparations like charoset, moror, all of those things should be done on Friday, because you cannot do them on Shabbos. Even the things in malacha, but if they're purely preparatory for after Shabbos, not supposed to do it on Shabbos. So person needs to think closely, what should I do and what can I do practically on Friday to prepare for the Seder, so that when Shabbos ends, Yom Tov has arrived, we can begin the Seder promptly. Let's talk about Shabbos meals, because this is the real interesting and, I guess you could say, complicating aspect. Usually, Erev Pesach is not a great day for eating, because you can't eat matzah, you can't eat chametz, so much to do, preparations to maintain. Of course, even if you're Bechor, normally you will go to a siyum, so you're not fasting, but the eating opportunities are not that vast. I know in our house, not that I ever go hungry under Ruthie's care, but the options for food on Erev Pesach are not that vast. I don't go to complaining at all, but it's quite limited. Perhaps in your house it's different. But this year it's got to be different because you've got Shabbos, and Shabbos is still Shabbos. So one is not permitted to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. That I'm sure you know. And although many poskim are of the view that the prohibition mentioned in the Talmud of matzah on Erev Pesach only applies to the morning or the afternoon, not the night before. But nevertheless, general practice stringent that we don't have chametz on Erev Pesach even from the night before, and it's quite a widespread minhag to not have matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And it's interesting, although it's hardly found in the source, I only found there's some very kind of passing references to it, but it has now become quite common. People don't have any matzah from Purim even. I grew up with that. I'm not saying I grew up with all the stringencies, the latest chumras from Borough Park. I did not, living in Lafayette, Indiana. That we used to do. We used to not have matzah from Purim, and many others have that minhag as well. But Shabbos on Erev Pesach, so you have a mitzvah to eat meals on Shabbos. So what can you eat? If you can't eat matzah, what do you eat? Of course, you've got to eat chametz. You can't eat sweet potatoes and mushrooms and other kosher Pesach and meat and things like that. I mean, you can, but you don't fulfill the mitzvah of your Shabbos with it. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of Shabbos meals, you've got to have lechem mishnah, as we know. So you've got to have lechem mishnah as well. So here we get into the sort of challenge, because the challah that you might normally buy or that you might normally make and enjoy is not really such a great idea for Shabbos of Erev Pesach because of the crumbs, because of the leftovers, sort of thing. So it requires some close thought. Many people prefer to use something that doesn't make so many crumbs, something like pita or bagels. Also, individual challah rolls are a good idea. I saw nowadays you can even get quite small individual challah rolls. You can get quite sort of large ones for someone who's got a big appetite, but you can get small ones as well that are like the size not much larger than actually. And those are great because you can eat one, you can eat two, perhaps, and you don't have anything left over. So if you're feeding X number of people, adults, children, whether you're on your own, I hope you're not on your own, but if you've got others with you, however many there may be, so think closely, how much are we going to eat? And try to plan so as to limit the leftover possibilities. Now, those rolls that you may want, the challah should be hamotzi and not the so-called mazonos bread, because we've got to have bread. But here's where it gets a little bit more subtle. I hope I won't confuse you, and listen closely. There's another option, which I recommend, and that is using matzah ashira. Let me explain. The reason I recommend it is if we can have a chametz-free environment in my home, your home, on Shabbos, Erev Pesach, it makes things a lot more relaxed. How can you do that? If you can't have matzah and to have lechem, what do you do? So there is such a category known as matzah ashira. Ashira is with an ayin. It comes to the word ashir, which means rich. It's enriched matzah. It's enriched with grape juice or apple juice, maybe some oil. Probably doesn't need any sugar because the juice has enough sugar in that already. Maybe some eggs, and it's colloquially known as egg matzah. That's what we used to call it. I think that's what it's normally known as in English, as egg matzah, because eggs are added to the ingredient list. So egg matzah you may eat on Erev Pesach. Why? Because the kind of matzah that we may not eat on Erev Pesach is the type of matzah that we could use to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on the Seder night. The rabbis wanted us to have the anticipation of the matzah, the special taste, whether the crunch or even the old-time religion in matzah maybe didn't have a crunch or taste. It wasn't the same type of bread that we eat the rest of the year. And we know it's so rich in symbolism, and it's a mitzvah min haTorah. It's a precious mitzvah that we want to fulfill. We want to fulfill it with appreciation. So therefore, the rabbi said, do not eat, one is not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. But the type of matzah that you're not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach is the type of matzah with which you can fulfill the mitzvah. So egg matzah, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah with egg matzah. Why? Because it's matzah ashira. And I'm sure you remember that the matzah that we eat at the Seder is called lechem oni, the bread of poverty. So the matzah at the Seder, in addition to being kosher lePesach, also has to be matzah, which is the poor man's bread. And this matzah ashira, I told you, is the rich man's bread because it has a dish, or the rich man's matzah. So therefore, egg matzah, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah on this, for you may eat it on Erev Pesach, but there's a sting in the tail. The sting in the tail is that according to Ashkenazic tradition, we actually don't eat egg matzah on Pesach either, at all, because of certain halachic uncertainties about how quickly the dough ferments. And even though the predominant opinion is that when you need a flour with fruit juice, the fermentation doesn't take place at all. And that is the accepted view according to the basic halakhah. There is a school of thought that says, well, actually, maybe the process of fermentation takes place even faster. We know it's not the same as water, but maybe it's, so to speak, worse than water. Or maybe some water is mixed in with the fruit juice, and then it will certainly ferment more quickly. And therefore, according to Ashkenazic tradition, the Ramah says we don't eat egg matzah on Pesach for a healthy person, but a young child or a person who has digestive issues, or an elderly person, or someone who has dietary needs is allowed to eat matzah ashira on Pesach, even according to the Ramah. But he or she may not fulfill the mitzvah on the Seder night with it. So the Seder night is still going to be a separate issue for someone who has difficulty digesting regular matzah. Just parenthetically, that's going to be the subject of our Shabbos drasha this Shabbos on the rise of oat matzah. That's just as an aside. So going back to the egg matzah is a slight anomaly. Even though we don't eat it on Pesach, Ashkenazim, we don't eat it for under normal circumstances on Pesach, but it's not really chametz either, because the accepted halachically authorized view is that matzah that, or the dough that is kneaded with fruit juice does not ferment. And it's only a stringency on the part of the Ashkenazim that we don't eat it unless a person, as I said, has a need to do so. So since it's not really chametz, so you may eat that on Friday night, and you may eat that on Shabbos morning as well, because it's not really chametz. You may not eat it on Shabbos afternoon, because we do treat it as chametz, and then we avoid eating it. But we at least avoid the situation of possibly like contaminating our environment with chametz, because maybe you've got a young child, or maybe an older child who should know better, who has a tantrum or something like that. All possibilities exist. So if we can avoid introducing chametz into the household altogether, you've got that benefit. There's one last aspect of it, though, because you've this egg matzah is prepared with ingredients, it probably has the status of a bracha borei minei mezonos, because of the reason that we've just said. It's bread which is a bit like cake, and even though it's matzah, so it's not cake, but it doesn't taste the same as regular matzah. It's sweeter. It's, like I said, probably easier to digest. It doesn't have the same crunch to it. Maybe a bit tastier as well. It doesn't taste like cardboard, and therefore, bracha is borei minei mezonos. So how can you use it for your Shabbos meal if the bracha is borei minei mezonos? The answer is that if you are using it for lechem mishnah, you're sort of elevating it to the status of bread. And you can, and you should say the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You should wash your hands in the usual way, say the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz, but you should have a substantial amount. So I'm not talking about the amount of matzah on the Seder night that you have to eat. That's a separate discussion. But we're just talking about the amount of egg matzah that you should eat in order to sort of elevate it from a mezonos snack food to have the status of bread for lechem mishnah. And I would say one whole piece of egg matzah would be sufficient, together with other items on the menu. So if you're not eating that as the basis of your entire meal, it's just you're eating of the challah that you would normally have, then one whole piece of egg matzah would be sufficient, and that would be, in my suggestion, the right way to go. But for those who have such a minhag or prefer to go with a bagel or pita or real chametz, you can certainly do that as well. But once you finish your meal, you've got to be sure there's no chametz scattered on the floor, and it's ideal if you can eat the chametz in a restricted area. So if you're in a room, maybe this table is already set for the Seder night, that's fantastic. If you have another space in the house where you can eat, whether the kitchen or a what they call in Israel a pinat ochel, or even better, if circumstances and weather permits, you can eat your chametz and your meal outdoors. I've got a friend, a colleague who's a rabbi in Boca Raton, Florida, and that's what he's recommending. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, you live in Boca Raton, your meal outside without difficulty this time of year. In London, it's a bit more of an uncertain prospect, but who knows? The weather might be nice and it might allow it. So if you're eating outdoors, then you don't have to sweep up the crumbs. You just have to be sure that there are no large pieces of chametz left on the ground. And if you want, after you have the chametz, or like I said, even the egg matzah, which is kind of in between, it's not really chametz, but it's not quite matzah either. Once you eat that outside, you can then continue your meal inside with kosher Pesach ingredients. The only thing is that when you bench, you've got to either go back outside for Birkat Hamazon, because that's where your meal, your bread part of the meal was, or if you can see from inside where you ate outside. So in our configuration, in our house, that if the weather is decent, that should be possible for us. We have, Mitzvah Hashem, a household full of children and grandchildren, so I know Ruthie is definitely hoping that we'll be able to eat outdoors. The weather will allow for that. But in any case, it is a good option if it's practical, if circumstances allow for that. But in order to say Birkat Hamazon, you have to be in a place where you ate the bread, or at least where you can see where you ate the bread. Now, what
With
about
the matzah ashira, if it's not chametz, then you can eat it at the proper table. It's not like if you were having pita or something.
it's true. So you don't want it to actually get into your Pesach food, because we try to avoid eating it on Pesach, but it's not really chametz. There's no prohibition of owning it, and if a small amount, it would probably be batel v'shishim as well. So yes, if you're using matzah ashira, and especially if it's not convenient or practical to eat outside for whatever the reason, yeah, you can eat that. You can eat it I would still be a bit reluctant to eat it on Pesach dishes, etc. But you probably could if you needed to. If you need to, you could, because it's not really chametz. It's a stringency that we don't eat it on Pesach, but it's not really chametz. And the proof is that if a person, or there's a household where you've got an elderly individual or someone who has a delicate stomach and can't eat matzah, and maybe there's not a lot of other food around to eat, so the Ramah himself says that such a person is allowed matzah ashira. So you see, it's not really chametz; it's just a stringency. So yeah, it does have that kind of best of both worlds.
Thank you. And timing wise, because you were saying about not having chametz after 11, something.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, we're getting to that. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk first about the menu items. So it's best to eat Pesach food prepared in Pesach utensils and eat on Pesach crockery. And as I said, if the bread or the pita or the matzah shiro, for that matter, in a separate place or in a separate way, then you can finish that, and then the rest of the meal you can eat it with Pesach food with Pesach utensils in that way. Some prefer to use disposable plates and even cutlery for the meals on Shabbos, on this particular Shabbos, and again, that's a convenience which circumstances in the world can often allow. And if a person wants to spend a bit more on better quality disposable chad pa'ami cutlery, I mean that Swedish girl Greta Thunberg probably wouldn't approve, but okay, for once a year we might need to take advantage of that option. So it's something to consider if you like. Now, quite significant is what and pertinent is what Ariella just asked a moment ago. when does this meal need to be completed by? So really, some of what we've said is pertinent to Friday night as well, that you want to avoid, chametz on your Pesach dishes, etc. But more sort of crucial is the Shabbos morning, because the latest time for eating chametz is 10:07 a.m. So what I said about 11:53, that's the latest time for burning the chametz on Friday. But on the actual Erev Pesach, so the time to remove the chametz, not to burn, because we won't burn chametz on Shabbos, but the latest time to remove the chametz on Shabbos is 11:34. The reason it's a few minutes earlier is that uh, the Friday is only like a stringency, because really it's not even Erev Shabbos on Friday. It's just because we don't want to do different than we do most years. So I've gone with a more lenient of calculation for the time for the Friday. But on Shabbos, the latest time by which the chametz has to be removed is 11:34, but the time by which the chametz has to be completed, has to be eaten, meaning the latest time for eating chametz, is 10:07 a.m. Some are lenient for a few more minutes, but I'm recommending the 10:07. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't normally eat Shabbos lunch quite that early. Not by far. I did when I was in yeshiva, by the way, because we used to daven at 7:30. We finished by 9:30, and we went down to eat. We had kiddush, but those days are long behind me. So on this Shabbos, though, we will daven shachris early, and I think most places, Orthodox synagogues everywhere in the world, will daven quite early, probably around 7 o'clock, maybe earlier. But we're davening at 7 o'clock at Kesher. And our intention is to finish before 9 a.m., which will give everybody just a little bit more than an hour by which to have the morning meal. Now, you don't have to finish eating by then, but you have to eat the chametz part by then. So practically, if you get home and you make kiddush and you wash hands, in the normal way, you or your family. I'm not saying it's the easiest Shabbos to have guests, but however they may be, like, as I said, in our Simon household, we're having Mirz Hashem children and grandchildren, so even just to get them to the table will take time. uh, Eat the lechem mishnah, or as we've been talking about, the egg matzah, and we can finish the chametz part of the repast by 10:07, and that's what a person would need to do. Uh, the And after that, you can continue the meal at your leisure, eating and consuming only Pesach only food after that time. It's also a good idea to like brush your teeth, or to rinse out your mouth, because if you're just eating chametz, and now we've crossed the threshold, we're not allowed to eat chametz, so it's proper for a person to ensure that he's not going to inadvertently be eating chametz because he just finished chewing 3 minutes before. So it's proper to rinse your mouth. You can use mouthwash. I don't recommend toothpaste on Shabbos or on Yom Tov generally. I don't. That is the limited practice to avoid toothpaste, but you can use mouthwash, and you can use dental floss as well, as long as your teeth won't bleed, because you're not allowed to cause your gums to bleed on Shabbos. And I would say that if your gums bleed when you floss, either you're not flossing regularly, or maybe you've got something with your gums. But under normal circumstances, one is allowed to floss teeth on Shabbos, as long as you don't cause your gums to bleed. Now, what about the leftovers? So I said you try to limit the leftovers, but you can't guarantee, maybe you get, one challah roll per person, and then one of the children is sleeping. So, he didn't consume it. So what will you do, for example? So if it's practical, you can flush it down the toilet. If it's practical, you can break it up and flush it down. If it's practical, another possibility is to pour bleach on the chametz. The bleach, of course, renders it in. It's not chametz anymore because it's inedible, so it's not chametz. Then you can just put it in the bin, in the circular file. If none of this is possible because you don't have bleach, or you don't have something suitable, or maybe you have too much chametz, you can just put it in the wheelie bin as well. It's been observed that the bins in Barnet belong to the council, and since it belongs to the council, once you discard it, and of course by putting it there, you're showing that you don't need more you want it, so you would not be in violation of the prohibition of owning chametz once you put it in the bin. But it's best to like as I said, to destroy it in other means that we've mentioned. In extremis, you can place the chametz with your food or your spirits that you've previously isolated and you've included in your sale of chametz as well. But that is not really the preferred option, but rather you plan, excuse me, the um, eating program in such a way as to avoid having excessive amounts of leftover chametz. In any case, this process must be accomplished by the Sofzman Biur, which is 11:34 in London. And at that point, one does say the Kol Chamir declaration. It's quite important because by so doing, you disown whatever chametz you may have overlooked. Despite intentions and my best intentions, errors can always take place. You can find a wafer in a pocket that was overlooked, that sort of thing. And therefore, it's quite important to remember, even on Shabbos, I should say, on Shabbos, although it is Shabbos, to make that declaration that there's nothing, there's no halachic barrier to declaring something hefker on Shabbos, and that's exactly what you do. And if your Aramaic is rudimentary, then it's best to say it in English by all means, because it's not like a prayer, it's actually a declaration, and you need to understand what you're saying. Okay, let's talk about Suda Shishit. Now, this
Sorry,
is
can I ask
sure.
you another question?
Yeah.
Can you do the hamotzi on the, for example, matzah asherah somewhere with the intention of finishing the meal in a different place, in a different
Yes, you
location?
can. Yeah, yes, you can. Um, yes, you can. But normally you would need to eat some of the matzah ashir in the second place as well. But if you choose to like begin your meal outside and you eat the matzah ashira and you've had the appropriate amount, and you want to finish your meal inside or some, wherever it may be, you can do that. Yeah, yes, you can. It,
But then
yeah,
you won't be able to see the place for
yeah,
Birkat Hamazon. So
yeah. So if you can't send for Birkat Hamazon, you should go back outside for Birkat Hamazon.
but if it's like a
about
totally different apartment or different,
Different
like a
apartment.
totally
If it's
different
not practical to go back, then it's a problem because in order to say Birkat Hamazon, it says, by the way, that just generally, if a person eats and then he goes out, he maybe goes to see a friend and he realizes, I didn't say Birkat Hamazon. He's got to go back to where he was in order to say Birkat Hamazon. So if you're talking about like into dwellings or something like that, then it is problematic. You can have in mind to finish your meal in a second place if you have bread or matzah ashira in that second place as well. But if your whole strategy is to not introduce the matzah ashira or the bread to the other location, then you really do need to say Birkat Hamazon. But what you can do is you can just wash your hands. You can recite Kiddush, wash your hands, say the Bruchas Hamotzi. Everyone, however many there are, will have the matzah ashira in that location, and you can say Birkat Hamazon there as well, and then you can still go
I
inside
can have
and
the
go to
meal
another
there
dwelling.
without, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
but there's a weakness there as well, because if that's the whole part of your meal, I said that if you're having other menu items, then one matzah would be enough. But if you're not, you probably would have to have two matzahs, because
right,
really the normal bracha name is onos. So it's you can't kind of have it both ways where you say, well, this is bari name is onos, but what I want it to be bread, I'm going to consider it bread. You may, but you've got to have quite a lot of it then.
right. Okay,
So that's the kind of trade-off.
what
okay.
about the cakes made of potato starch? These are
So
not
yeah,
flour.
so the bracha there is shahakol niamid varo. So
Yes,
you can certainly eat it, and it's kasher lePesach. Even for Ashkenazim, it's kasher lePesach. But the bracha is shakol yemid. So it's questionable if you can even make kiddush on such a thing. Meaning you make kiddush on wine, but you've got to have your meal there as well. So
yes,
insofar as the mitzvah of Su'uda on Shabbos, no, you've got to have something made from flour from the 5 species of grain. Yeah,
yes.
and on Erev Shabbos, we've got the further difference difficulty, I'm going to talk about it right now, that really we don't even like to have like cake or muffins made from matzah meal on Erev Pesach. But let's talk about that right now. We've got only a few more minutes in any case. So what about Sudah Shishit? So for this, there is no completely satisfactory solution, by which I mean that there's a mitzvah to have 3 meals on Shabbos. So the first meal we have Friday night, the second meal we have Shabbos day or in the morning or the daytime. And then Suresh, you normally have it sometime in the afternoon. According to the common practice, usually quite late in the afternoon. That's called Sudah Shishit. And you may know that although there is a mitzvah of 3 meals on Shabbos, it's part of the honor of Shabbos is to have 3 meals. But Sudah Shishit doesn't have to be bread, even though it's preferable, it's recommended, it's praiseworthy. But one can fulfill the mitzvah of the third meal with other food other than bread. And there some people who do that. However, the time for Sudah Shishit is in the afternoon. So in the afternoon, you definitely cannot have bread. You definitely cannot have matzah either. If you're Sephardi, you can have matzah ashira. I kept talking about the Ashkenazim because Sephardim have matzah ashira the whole Pesach. So the Sephardim can have matzah ashira on Shabbat afternoon. But I'm Ashkenazi, many of us are Ashkenazim, and therefore that option is not available. So what can you do? You can't have a lechem mishnah Shabbat afternoon. Now you can have Sudah Shishit in the morning, even though normally Sudah Shishit must be Shabbat afternoon. But there are those who have it in the morning. We'll get to that shortly. So let's talk about what options may exist. So even muffins or cupcakes or something like that made from matzah meal, which is certainly allowed. I mean, Hasidim have a minhag that they don't have that either. The halakhic basis for that is very flimsy. The halakhic basis for that stringency is very doubtful. But okay, that is the minhag. But certainly for the rest of us, we do have food made with matzah meals. But if it's baked, it's too close to the matzah that we eat on the Seder night. So what can you do? So one option is knedlach, which I don't think knedlach are the natural kind of basis for a meal. They're great in your chicken soup, but whether that works for a meal unto itself, I don't know. But that technically it's brought in the poskim, that is an option. And the right time to have Sudah Shishit ideally should be before 4:26 p.m. because we want to have an appetite still for the Seder night. Even though I would that, according to the reality of the setting of the sun and nightfall in London and in many parts of the northern hemisphere, it's so late. And of course, the Seder has so many beautiful, wonderful features that take time before we get to the matzah, that at least in the Simon family, it's probably 2 hours at least, maybe 3, maybe 4 hours until we eat them. So even if a person eats, late in the afternoon, he still will have an appetite for the matzah at night because he won't get to it till late at night. But okay, I'm just saying that if you don't sort of adhere to that recommendation, the 4:26, you can eat after that as well, but you should still try to ensure that you have an appetite still for the Seder night. So you can eat Sudah Shishit with meat, with fish, with fruit, with vegetables, are options that are still available. But there is another possibility, which again, the diehards do it, and more power to them. Therefore, I feel I should mention it, but it's quite a challenge. And that is the following. You may not have bread. You may not have matzah all of Erev Pesach. You may not have chametz after 10:07. But before 10:07, you can eat a meal, and if you want, you can eat 2 meals before 10:07. So there are some people who rush home from shul, or they daven super early. They come home and they make kiddush. They eat a meal consisting mostly of challah, or of pita, or bagel, or matzah shira, if you go down that route, and they have fulfilled the mitzvah of the first daytime seudah. Then they say Birkat Hamazon. Then they go for a walk. They go to learn in another room, something like that, and they make some kind of a hefsek, some interruption. So they say, I finished my meal, I've taken up some other activity for a little while, now I'm going to go back and have another meal. And that additional meal can count as Sudah Shishit. Now, it's not going to be ideal because, like we know, Sudah Shishit is supposed to be in the afternoon. And here, this person is having two meals, one after the other, or with a short interval in between in the morning. Not only that, but he's got the second meal by 10:07. So how is that possible? The answer is just about possible, but it's quite stressful. So I'm not especially recommending it. There's some people who do that. There's some people who do both, in fact, meaning they have the two meals before 10:07 in the way we've described. And then in the afternoon, they also make a point of having another meal, albeit not with the mazonos and not with hamotzi, but they still have the other meal, that which probably most of us will do in any case in the afternoon. So there are those who try, if you work at it assiduously enough, you can have two meals in the morning before 10:07. But either way, you can finish the meal after 10:07 with Pesach food. So whether you're having one meal or two meals, you can finish the chametz part or the matzah, which we said like chametz l'chumra before 10:07. And then after that, you can eat the rest of the meal. You can say Divrei Torah, you can sing Pesach songs, Shabbos songs. You've got, the whole morning still ahead of you. And Mitzvah Hashem, you can still have a nap and be ready for the Seder at night. Okay, we're nearly done, but there are a couple of other important aspects which we'll do in the final minutes. Hachana is preparing for after Shabbos. Now, any Shabbos of the year, one is not allowed to prepare for after Shabbos, whether after Shabbos is Yom Tov, after Shabbos is Chol HaMoed, or after Shabbos is a weekday, which of course is normally the case week by week. Shabbos is Shabbos, and a person is not allowed to do something on Shabbos that is only undertaken for a need for after Shabbos. So on this Shabbos of Erev Pesach, you're not allowed to prepare the table or get the food ready or even get out all the Haggadot, get them down from the shelf and put them by each place, for example. That is all hachana. You're doing something on Shabbos. You're troubling yourself for something on Shabbos, which is not for the need of Shabbos, but just because after Shabbos, you don't want to do it then, you like to do it now. That's not in keeping with the honor of the Shabbos. So to read a Haggadah or to study it or to learn it or to think a beautiful insight I want to share with my family, that is allowed because that's studying Torah. The fact you have in mind to also share it with others later on, that is not a problem, because the activity of reading the Haggadah or studying it or learning it, that is fine. But actions like preparing the table, etc. What about sleeping in the afternoon? So I just referred to it at the very beginning. I said as well, Erev Pesach this year, you can sleep. Hopefully you'll be able to. So one is allowed to sleep on Shabbos in order to have energy for after Shabbos if you don't say so explicitly. So you can think in your mind, oh, Baruch Hashem, we're going to start the Seder at this time. We won't finish till so much later, all that wine, but I'm going to take a nap for an hour or 2 hours or however long it may be. And that way I'm going to have energy for the Seder. You can think it, but you shouldn't say it out loud. Now, I mean, there's no reason you would need to say it out loud, but if somebody asks you, you shouldn't say, well, I'm going to take a nap now so that I'll have energy for the Seder tonight. You shouldn't say explicitly. Similarly, but you're allowed to take the nap. Just don't say that it's for that purpose. Similarly, if you've got Yom Tov clothing, you've got a dress, or you've got a suit, or you've got a tie, or you've got a shirt, you've got cufflinks special for Yom Tov, you can change into that on Shabbos in preparation for Yom Tov, as long as you don't say to your family, look at these new cufflinks that I got as a gift. I'm going to wear them especially for Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you can say it, but if you're changing on Shabbos for Yom Tov, don't say explicitly that's the reason you're doing it. Because whatever you're wearing for Yom Tov, whatever you're changing into for the honor of Yom Tov, is also okay for Shabbos. So therefore, it is not self-evident that you're doing something for Yom Tov. You could be doing it for the honor of Shabbos as well. The good news is if you have a housekeeper or a cleaner or someone like that, you instruct her to perform preparations that are not blatantly for the Seder. Like you can ask her to tidy up the room where the Seder is going to take place, or you can ask her to, other activities, like maybe even to put pillows on the chairs, because that's something which a person might want to have anyway. So if you have a housekeeper or someone like that, so at the level of instructing her to do something that is not a malacha, but it's needed for after Yom Tov, after Shabbos, that would be allowed. Let's talk briefly, and our time is nearly up, about Yom Tov itself. So before preparing for the Seder or doing any malacha, even once Shabbos has ended and Yom Tov has arrived, a person must say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. That's a very beautiful. I love that turn of phrase. We say when Shabbos ends, a person can say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol. But on those special occasions when Shabbos gives way to Yom Tov, excuse me, we say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. Blessed is he who distinguishes between the sacred and the sacred. Two different types of kedusha. So, of course, on Shabbos we have certain restrictions, and some of them don't apply in Yom Tov. Many of them do, but some, as we know, do not apply in Yom Tov. And certainly, what we just said before, the preparations for Yom Tov, you shouldn't do on Shabbos. Once Shabbos ends, you say Baruch Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, and then you can certainly do those preparations, and you can do malachas which are allowed on Yom Tov. You can do as well. For those who daven Ma'ariv, we say a special paragraph v'todi'enu, which takes the place. It's the counterpart to the couple of sentences of Havdalah that we say normally when Shabbos ends. But when Shabbos way to Yom Tov, there's a special paragraph v'todienu, which is a beautiful formula there as well. One should endeavor to start the Seder promptly following Ma'ariv, and all relevant preparations should be accomplished before Shabbos, where this is possible. We mentioned that earlier. It's almost inevitable, unless you live in the Southern Hemisphere, which actually last Pesach, Ruthie and I were in the Southern Hemisphere, and then Yom Tov began quite a lot earlier. But in the hemisphere, this year and most years, Yom Tov begins and ends quite late. By the time you get home from Shul after Shabbos, first night of Yom Tov, it's sure to be quite late. So therefore, it's proper to try to begin the Seder promptly to the extent that can be achieved. And that the last comment I want to make, especially for this year, is that Kiddush at the Seder is combined with Havdalah. We say Kiddush, it's the famous Yak Nahaz. You just follow instructions in your Haggadah. You'll be sure to say it correctly, as long as you have a good quality Haggadah. And you will see that the Havdalah formula is incorporated within the Kiddush. It's, as I said, the famous formulation Yak Nahaz, Yain Kiddush Ner Zman, Havdalah Zman. For the bracha on the flame, because there is a bracha Bori Ma'orei Ha'esh, so normally on Motzei, we strike a match. When Shabbos ends, we strike a match, we light the Havdalah candle, we extinguish it after. We don't do those things on Yom Tov, but of course you already have Yom Tov candles which have been hopefully kindled sometime earlier, and what you should do, or ask someone who's with you, to put the two candles together, to merge the flames together, and that way we can say the bracha Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh. There are those who don't have that requirement, meaning they say it's not necessary to put the candles together because you've got to be quite careful. You don't want it to drip and you don't want to extinguish one with the other. But there are those who say, no, you don't need to do that. You can just look at the candles burning separately, one to the other, meaning each one separately, and you can still say the bracha Bari Maraish. My recommendation, what I normally do, is we do put them together in that way. And in that manner, one is able to achieve the honor of Shabbos, the honor of Pesach, the honor of Erev Pesach as well, also the restrictions as well as the responsibilities that apply to Erev Pesach. And of course, the main thing is that the Seder, I mean, what I said is just now is also important, but it all leads up to the Seder itself, where we have special precious mitzvot that we can only fulfill fully this one night of the year. The mitzvah of eating matzah, the mitzvah drabanan of moror, the mitzvah drabban of 4 cups of wine, the mitzvah min haTorah of telling, recounting, especially if you're blessed to have children with you as well, to fulfill the mitzvah of telling them, transmitting the memory of the redemption from Mitzrayim. And I wish everyone a wonderful Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a Yom Tov which is joyful, which is peaceful, and which is redemptive as well. So I think we've maxed out our time on this important and, as I say, niche subject. Comes only once in several years and not again for another 20 years. Tomorrow night we'll do Seder inspiration from Baal Haturim, some beautiful insights on the Yitzias Mitzrayim narrative in the Torah, tomorrow night at 8, from 8 to 8:30. And on Shabbos we're doing gluten-free Pesach, the rise of oat matzah. So please join us for that as well. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Paul
Thank
for
you very
hosting.
much.